going to be talking about issues related to our identity. Bonnie and I thought that it would be important to have some ground rules around the session. Now, if we've got more time, we would be developing these with you, but Bonnie's sharing them on the screen now. Hopefully you can see them. So the things that we think are important for this session are trusting each other, feeling that this is a safe place for us to talk about things to do with identity, that if people share anything personal about their identity, that it's within this session, that we feel that there aren't any wrong or stupid questions or answers. Don't feel that if you're not quite sure about what we're talking about, do ask. And also, if there's times or things that you don't want to share, then that's fine as well. So if we can bear these ground rules in mind as we go through the session. So what we wanted to try and do with this session is really think about the additional things around collecting equalities data and some of the more complex and nuanced things around collecting equalities data, going beyond the sort of, I suppose, if you like, tick boxes of collecting information about specific characteristics. So to get us started, we're going to do a bit of an icebreaker. So if we could go around, as we say, it's a short session, so if you can be succinct, and if we can just go around, perhaps Bonnie or Sorrel, you could help facilitate, bring people in if necessary. And if you could just share one thing with the group that you are proud of about yourself. It could be anything. Our icebreakers take a little bit longer than we but I think it's really important for us to start, if we're thinking about identity, to start thinking with ourselves. So that's great. So now we're going to play a game in breakout rooms. In a minute, you'll be put into Sorrel will put you into a breakout room for let's see. I think Sorrel, we should be all right actually with say shortening it to about 6 or 7 minutes.
Yeah, so if I do 6 minutes with a 1 minute countdown.
Yeah, that's fine. And what I'd like you to do, you'll be just in the breakout room with one other person, and just briefly introduce yourselves to each other, but just like your name and so on, and like where you work and that kind of thing. But then what I'd like you to do, and it might seem a bit uncomfortable, but is to just by what you can tell about the person by interacting with them in the room, is to make an assumption about them. It can be an assumption about anything at all to do with that person. It might be they enjoy gardening or something, just anything at all. And then just spend a couple of sort of quiet minutes thinking about that. And then I would like you to share that assumption with your partner and to find out whether the assumption is correct or not. And just spend a few minutes talking about those assumptions. That's why I said we need to trust each other and feel comfortable about doing that. And that's to help us think about assumptions that we might make in our work when we're thinking about collecting information about equalities and so on. So, and then when you've been in the rooms and done that exercise, then we'll come back together and share just for a few minutes how that felt, and then Bonnie's going to take you through the rest of the session.
Great. I will just summarize because Christine, we're losing a bit of sound from you. Right. So very simply, you'll be in breakout rooms with a partner. You will need to make an assumption on your partner, whatever that might be. Christine gave the example, or if someone likes gardening, or if someone likes curry, or whatever that might be. Think about the assumption in the breakout room and share with your partner what that assumption is, and then you can discuss whether that assumption is correct or not. It's just a game for us to think through what are the assumptions we make about everyone, including beneficiaries or who we work with later on. So that's all. I think.
Hi, everyone. So, as I was explained, we're going to use a Jamboard, but don't worry if you do have any problems with it. Just post your thoughts in the chat, and that will be fine as well. In a minute, I'm going to invite you to start off by posting some of your thoughts about how it felt to do the assumption game. But I'm just going to, before we do that, just say a couple of words about the meat, if you like, of the session, and why we decided to call the session I Am Me. So really this session is, as I said, thinking about going beyond collecting equalities data. Hopefully we all know why we collect basic equalities data to make our services more inclusive, make sure that we are reaching everyone that we would hope to reach, and a broad range of people, and so on. But people can be quite reluctant to always fill in the forms that we give them and the surveys and so on. And one of the reasons that we have found it here that people feel that way is that the standard way of collecting equalities data doesn't really always allow people to how they identify themselves. So at the HERE network, we've started experimenting with using the various standard categories that one might expect, but also allowing people to self-identify. So on an equalities monitoring form, in each stage of the form, having a box which says in your own words, and allowing people to do that. And at a recent event that we did, someone wrote in that box, I am me. And I thought it was really powerful about people thinking about who they are. And we found that people really value, especially around different categories like ethnicity, where people don't want to necessarily put that they are mixed race, that they want to speak more about who they really are from the point of view of their identity, especially around sexual orientation as well, gender identity. People really seem to value that opportunity. So that's really what we wanted to ask people to think about, the opportunities to do that and really capture who your beneficiaries are. So I'm now going to invite you to post some thoughts about how you found the assumption game into the Jamboard, and then Bonnie will take you through the rest of the session.
Great, thank you, Christine. So I think I'm going to share screen so you see the Jamboard. It will be great just to see what people have felt the assumption games to be, if there is something that helps you reflect. Someone has already posted. I hope other people can catch up and also share how you felt about the game. Yeah, being self-conscious. I think that's a very actually, yeah, very great reflection, because I always think about whenever we distribute equalities monitoring form, it must be how our the people we support, how they feel. We keep asking them lots of questions about their identity, and maybe that's making them self-conscious too. There's feeling of being embarrassed. That is a bit scary to kind of be, yeah, exposing ourselves to judgment, I guess, of other people. One person said it was, yeah, really fun, and it seems the match were both quite accurate, the assumption that you've made of each other. Yeah, the idea of making assumptions being a bit awkward. because this person said you usually challenge your own assumptions, so it felt awkward to try to give into these assumptions, which is also a really good point, that we always have to challenge our own conscious and unconscious bias. So hopefully that's a fun way to kind of get into the headspace of thinking about equalities data. I'll share the next slide, and it would be good just to get everyone's thoughts about how you try to balance between complexity and not wanting too many detailed forms. So I guess in our experience trying to collect equalities data, we understand that there are oftentimes a lot of nuances, such as what Christine had mentioned, providing open-ended categories, such as in your own words, how you describe your own identity, those to be good ways of appreciating the nuances. But at the same time, you don't want to inundate your beneficiaries with too many questions to answer, especially on top of equalities data, you might be collecting other data such as the social impact outcomes that you might be capturing, confidence and whatnot. So just would like to hear from everyone. We will share some resources towards the end of this session, but if there are ways you try to address kind of this complexity, balancing the nuances around people's identities, but not wanting to inundate them with paperwork. Yeah, any ideas would be great. It's on the second page of the Jamboard.
So for anybody that's not there, you'll need to scroll on the arrows at the top of your screen, so you can use that to get to the Jamboard.
Yeah, someone's drawing on the second page.
Sorry, Bonnie, do you think you could just give an example to maybe get my going?
Yeah, so I guess an example is if you're working with a group of young people and you want to understand whether you're reaching all kinds of young people equally, you might want to ask them questions about their ethnicity, sexual orientation, and whether they have disability, etc. So if we think about the protected characteristics, but also other aspects of identity, such as their socioeconomic backgrounds, that would mean you probably need a 3-page form, at least, to just ask about how they identify themselves. We need to ask so many questions because there are lots of aspects to someone's identity. But then you don't want to interact with a young person and already give them a 3-page form to fill just on their identity and additional surveys. So yeah, how do we make that balance between appreciating the nuances of their identities as well as just not wanting too many detailed forms? So I guess how do you make that balance? Where do you go deep and where do you just keep it brief? So yeah, so I think there are on the Jamboard some ideas already. Yeah, only collect the information you need to keep it brief. Maybe simply asking the question, how do you self-identify, and not giving particular categories. But then if you do that, it will make categorization quite difficult. And actually, I give an example with the government when they do the census and they do have a space for ethnicity that people can fill in what they think their ethnicity is, and they have tried to group the data, and there are over 200 ethnic groups that people have kind of filled in. So if you have 200 ethnic groups, then it's quite hard then to categorize, and then the numbers become too small for you to analyze. So that's another challenge as well. There, someone mentioned that you can also, I think that's a great idea actually. So I don't know if some of you have been through exercises where you stand in a circle, and then if the statement rings true to you, you step into the circle. So then you see who's in and who's out. That game is done a lot in kind of diversity inclusion training. So you see how different people might be marginalized because of their experiences. So yeah, on issues of ethnicity, someone wrote that it reminds me of that exercise, step forward if you have experienced racial harassment. And that might be a less in kind of administrative or paper-laden way to actually understand the identities of who you're working with. Yeah, okay, that's really helpful. So I'm going to share some practical tips on perhaps some things that you can think about. I think the biggest challenge that we have found is not putting people into boxes and appreciating that identities do overlap. So someone identifying as a woman might also identify as disabled, as from a lower socioeconomic background, and sometimes the data infrastructure just put them into boxes and not appreciating all the nuances that intersect. So I want to share two practical examples of what resources you can go to, and we're happy to take any questions that you might have. So one is what Christine and the others did back, well, a year ago now. So standards for collection of equalities data focus on disability and impairment. So you can look at that guidance that they have provided to get a better understanding of how do you ask questions around disability. The other thing that we are currently working on is with 360 Giving. So 360 Giving is a platform that funders can use to upload grants data. So what we have been working on is creating a population framework, and we are doing this for the DEI data group, which is a group of funders that have come together to get a better understanding of how you collect and use and analyze equalities data. So we've come up with a first draft of the framework. So the framework basically outlines the different population groups around beneficiary categories. And we have kind of looked at, rather than using the term Black, Asian, and minority ethnic, or BAME, which often is criticized, we're now using the term communities experiencing racial inequity instead. We also outline kind of faith communities, migrants, disabled people, older and younger people, women and girls. So we have a list of population groups that we have identified as a way to hopefully support with categorization. And with categorization is also with the hope that the voluntary sector could build more on collecting equalities data, and that we're using similar categories. And the idea is that you can choose multiple categories so that you don't have to feel that you are pigeonholed into one. And if you look through the taxonomy, towards the end, we have an example, some examples of organizations that we can, oh, sorry, someone's calling me. Oh no. Sorry. So yeah, we have some examples of, for example, this youth club working on a social housing estate, but the people receiving support might identify as Black, young people, as well as economically disadvantaged. So being able to capture the dimension. So I'll just kind of pause there and see if Christine has anything to add around best practices of collecting equalities data, and see if you have any questions as well, the audience.
Thank you, Bonnie. Yes. I think it's important to think about the impact that beneficiaries might see to them providing data. So, for example, if you're trying to collect equalities data and people feel that their access to part of your service is going to be compromised, if you like, by not providing that data, then that is not a situation you want to be in. So, for example, if someone is say, for example, you're running a helpline, and particularly difficult circumstances, it might be against, for example, violence against women and girls, or it might be for advice to do with disability or so on, where people are ringing up or financial circumstances. The last thing they want to do is to be asked, oh, while you're on the phone, please tell us your ethnic origin or your sexual orientation. And you might not think that happens, but in fact it does. And obviously that is not good practice. I'm not saying that you shouldn't think about ways of collecting data from people who use your service, and that's important, but really think about the time and the circumstances in which you're collecting that data. You can think of all kinds of innovative ways to do that, and do get in touch if you want more support about ways of doing that. But that's really important, because you don't want to let collecting equalities data overtake the way that you're delivering your service in the correct way to your beneficiaries.